Hi everybody, I'm back with my oil analysis. I promised a couple of weeks ago when I did my grease and oil change here on the Camaro for the fall. I've been taking oil samples. This is my third one now. Every time with this car I only make a change once a year because I don't get that many miles on it. It's around 2,000 to 2,500 miles a year, and so I don't mile out, I age out, and at 1 year I change it. Wix has this really nice kit that you can buy, for about $25, and it costs you, $6, $7, $8 in postage. And you take the oil sample, you send it into the lab. So after a week to two, they email you a report back. They're pretty darn responsive, and I have the report. It's come back a few days ago, and I've been actually kind of digging in to try to understand what it means. It's normal, but it has a few interesting things that we're going to go dig into. So here goes. So just as a reminder, this is on my third gen Camaro, IROC Z28, 305 LB9 tune port injection engine. And this was my barn find car. It was in a garage for 25 years and it sat. And when I bought it, it hadn't been storage prepped. The engine was rusted solid. And you can go back and look at my earlier videos. I had to pull the engine out and have it redone, rebored. The engine died like in about 3 hours of running, less than 20 miles of me trying to do shakedown. The cam went flat because the block had a crack in it. It was dumping coolant in the oil, and so that engine was wasted. And I had to pull the engine again and get another block and go through a rebuild engine. So, long story short, I decided at the end of the 1,000-mile formal break-in period that, perhaps taking oil samples and monitoring this one would be a good idea. It kind of started from the idea of, it had a warranty on it for a couple of years, and so I kind of wanted to start monitoring it, make sure there were early warnings that if something went wrong in the warranty period, I'd have an early warning for it. Let's see what the third report says. So here's the numerical portion of the report. You can see that they provide three reports. The numbers, so there's August of 2021, November, October of 2022, a year ago, and here's the current one. And basically at the bottom you'll see that they show green, 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 which is that everything is normal. They consider it normal, there's nothing out of bounds. One of the things after having a cracked block is, I was watching coolant, and there's no coolant in the oil, and there's no water, significant water in the oil. It's just a trace. There's a very tiny condensation or something that we get in, and that's fine. So the top part is the lab numbers and what kind of oil I'm using. So then you go down here and you see we got iron at 36 parts per million, chromium, lead, tin, copper. Now the nice thing is that things are trending downward with time as the engine breaks in, which is a good thing. Don't quite know why copper bounced. When I get down here to contaminants though, I got a bunch of contaminants. Now they're still considered normal, they're not out of bounds, they're still relatively low numbers. 30 parts per million, sodium and potassium, but it's up from last year. So we're going to dig into that just a little bit more in a moment. Additives, this is kind of what kind of oil is it? And I guess you can see the consistency of VR1 through the 3-year period. Viscosity was good, and the base number, which is a measure of deterioration, is good. It had, basically the oil had a lot more miles on it. 2,000 miles was hardly dent in it. So then the second page of the report gives you these charts, and I'm going to go through them one at a time. So we'll step through here. So this one is parts per million of iron on this side and parts per million of chrome on the other side. And the main thing is, chrome has come down a little bit, but it's kind of flat, which is fine. It's a very small number. And chrome is mostly going to come out of things like chrome-plated piston rings. So not much there, and trending downward, which is good. Iron, I like this one because, we started out at a little bit under 60, and, then it was like, what we split the difference. We're down in the 30s now, about 35, and it's trending downward, which tells me that the engine, this is 8,000 miles since it was bored and rebuilt. That's telling me that the engine is probably still breaking in. And you go, that can't be. You had a 1,000-mile break-in, and you've been driving it, and it should be better. Well, I spent 40 years working in the auto industry and as an engineer, and when I worked with the engine teams, they told me that a lot of times in a passenger car in normal customer service, it's not unusual to see the engine go 10,000 miles and things still be improving, that it hasn't finished breaking in on a production engine. I guess as an interesting aside to that, when I was a powertrain guy, the engine teams, they had kind of an accelerated break-in. They didn't call it break-in. They called it friction stabilization, which means that as you break the engine in, it has fair amount of friction, rotating friction, sliding friction, and then as it breaks in, that friction works its way down and then levels out and stabilizes. And they had a special process where they could put it on a dynamometer. They'd start out easy and they'd work it up and run it harder, but they could friction stabilize an engine in about 24 to 36 hours on a dynamometer. If you start to think about, 24 hours of heavy throttle, that's quite a bit of miles, an average customer running, where you're usually running heavy throttle for 10 seconds at a time, right? So in any case, it looks like it's continuing to come down, and I thought the numbers were to the high side in the beginning, but now I see as we're going through that they're improving. Same thing's true in this one. You can see lead right there. And lead, which is in your bearing inserts typically, is again, it's coming down, and it started out at 25, and now we're down to what, 6, 7. Hey, that's pretty good. Says bearings are stabilizing, everything's coming in really good. Don't know quite why the copper spiked yet. That's an interesting one. And copper again would tend to be in bearings, which would seem like it was going against what I just said, that the bearings are getting better. So this one maybe bears watching, although 15 ppm isn't out of bounds. It's like, where'd you get copper from? So then here's the next one, which is sodium. And I said down in the contaminants, sodium was running down here between 5 and 10, and suddenly spiked up to 30. And silicone and aluminum are both good and decreasing. Aluminum, probably piston skirts or something, and again, things are moving, in a flat to downward direction. So that's good. There's my water. All my engines have about the same amount of water in them. It's kind of interesting because I sort of try to drive it out, get the engine hot before I do the change and drive that out, but there must be still some residual in there that I can't boil off. Base number and viscosity are flat, nothing big there. Numbers that could be to be expected, I guess I'd call it. So this year, what's different? Well, first of all, the fact that I had potassium numbers that were pretty significant. Well, they weren't bad, but there was some potassium there. Potassium has about 2 sources. One is coolant. Now, I don't have any coolant in the engine from the report, which means no liquid coolant is going into the oil. But potassium and sometimes sodium can be coming from coolant, where the coolant, say a head gasket, where it's leaking into the combustion chamber, burning, and going out the exhaust, and then some trace of that remaining residue ends up getting down into the oil. The other is wood smoke. And I kind of didn't think about that a whole lot last year, but I did say, hey, I'm in mid-Michigan here, we burn leaves in the spring and the fall, and people have brush fires to clean stuff up, and there's wood smoke around. This year we had really bad forest fires in Canada. The early season ones were over in Quebec, which is off to the east. The smoke plumes, I mean, we had heavy air quality problems here in Michigan when the prevailing winds were in the right direction. Going back up to the top for a minute, because I had some potassium in the oil, and it could have been coolant, and my coolant bottle tends to drop. If you go back and look at an older video that I've had quite some time back, it's a vented bottle, and I went back and found the science and the calculations and said the water in the coolant, because it's a vented bottle, can evaporate and your level can drop. And it seemed like on about the right order of magnitude. But I decided last year, first of all, I did a separate video on putting in stop leak, because auto manufacturers actually frequently put stop leak in engines at the factory. And they use the ginger root based tablets like Bars Leak sells. And so I bought some of those Bars Leak tablets, and again, a separate video explaining that. But I decided, hey, let's throw them in here and see if I can slow down the coolant level drop and see if I could get rid of potassium. Well, I didn't get rid of potassium, that's for sure. But I will say that the coolant level, I haven't had to fill it all summer. It was full cold in spring, and now it's about a ½ inch down from the cold mark. And normally by now, after I drove it through the whole summer, it would be low enough that I felt like I have to add it and bring it up. I did have, or thought I had, possibly a couple of, I'm going to call them trace leaks, at the radiator and at the lower radiator hose. And I kept tightening clamps, kept looking for it, but every now and then I'd smell a little bit. And it was like it was weeping a little bit, but I couldn't ever catch it. I found traces on the bottom of the lower hose that were dry. You know, like I say, I never could catch it when it was leaking. But once in a while I'd get a little smell. So anyway, that's gone away with the stop leak. The stop leak seems like it's working, but I still have potassium. Here's what the fire map looked like at the end of July. I think it was even worse in June. I just went and picked a map. You could pick any day. But you can see over here in this Quebec and Ontario area, the Quebec ones were the worst. And you know, Michigan's down here. And when the prevailing winds would come our way, I mean, you know, it was coloring the sunsets. It was, I mean, the smog meters in Detroit were going off. You know, they were having, you know, air quality days, poor air quality days, I'll call it. So there was a bunch, and you know, every year we get some, but this was kind of an exceptional season. So then I went and I started looking for some reports on smoke, on what's in wood smoke, what's in forest fire smoke. I found them in a couple of different places, but I found this one report that was filed with the EPA, and they were worried about wood stoves and fireplaces and, you know, wood burning in that respect. But they did do some things in this report for looking at forest fires and so forth. But anyway, over here on the left is the chemical composition of wood smoke. And this is only a part of the table. I mean, the table starts out with, you know, carbon monoxide and soot and so forth. You know, there's a lot of stuff in there. This one, this column says physical state, and P means particulates. So it's not like carbon monoxide that's just a gas that mixes. These are actually particles that float through the air. And so potassium, which is one of the big ones that you worry about with a coolant leak, well, here's K is potassium, and it's from 3 times, this is in grams per kilogram of wood. So you know, how many grams do you get in a kilogram of wood that burned? And forest fires burn a lot of wood, right? So 3 times 10 to the minus third grams, that's a tiny amount, but if you got enough kilograms, it's a lot. And it goes up to 8.6 times 10 to the minus 2. It's on the same order of magnitude. See here's Na is sodium. So sodium goes from 3 times 10 to the minus 3, the same minimum amount. Potassium can be higher, but sodium can be pretty significant too. And then at the bottom, since copper was elevated, I decided to go look for copper. Now these are times 10 to the minus fourth versus 10 to the minus third or squared, minus 2. So that means copper ought to be a much smaller factor, probably a factor of 10 to 100 less than the potassium number in how much is in the wood smoke. But copper is another potential contaminant because it would be a particle in that smoke. And I think all of these depend on what kind of trees burned and where they are and how hot they get, and what's the composition in the smoke. In a separate report that I found here, this one was looking at temperatures, and it says, how hot does the fire have to be to send those particles out? And it doesn't talk about copper, but you got to get about 760 degrees Celsius to get potassium to volatilize, and sodium just a little bit higher at 880 degrees. So if you got a really good hot going fire, you can get plenty of both of those. So that's kind of interesting. Given the amount of smoke we have, I'm going to say I think I got forest fire smoke showing up. The particles are small enough, they'll go through your air filter and end up in the engine, go through the combustion chamber. Combustion gases go through the oil pan, blow by. So that's what I'm going to claim for now, and I'm going to watch it. Am I a little nervous about could I have a coolant leak somewhere? A little. But I used stop leak. If there was a minor crack in a head even, it shouldn't have gotten worse, it should have gotten better. If it was a head gasket, it's also possible I got a head gasket going. And right now, the levels are low enough, the oil analysis guys don't trigger it, and see what the levels look like, and hopefully it's not as bad a fire year, and we'll see if those things come back down into line. Right now we're at 30 ppm. If I started getting up around 100, I think I'd be getting worried. But there's not a whole lot you can do without tearing into the engine hard. I had a thought about going in and say retorque the head gaskets, retorque the heads, but you got to pull the valve covers. That'll get you some of the bolts, and then the other bolts are down underneath the exhaust manifold. And I already looked at that a little bit, and it's a bear to get a torque wrench down there and see if they've moved. And most of these, this has the Felpro blue gaskets on it, on a fresh build. There's really no good reason that gasket shouldn't seal. And again, I'm going to go back to my coolant bottle. It's not going down. It's probably gone down half of what it did, before, maybe less. So, main thing is, engine's doing pretty good. We're, past 8,000 miles and then some since it was overhauled. The break-ins coming in and the wear metals are dropping down. Still got to understand if what I'm getting is outside environmental contamination. And hey, stop leak works. So right now she's all sitting here for the winter. I actually did get it out yesterday. We haven't had our first really good snow till today. And I got it out just ahead of the snowstorm and took it out, warmed it up, and got one last pre-winter ride in it. And now she's going to set. If you like these videos, hey, please hit like and subscribe and help support my channel. The more interactions I get like that, the more people get to see my videos. So that's all for now.